Have you ever wondered where you truly stand in the vast landscape of human intelligence? Not to compare yourself harshly to others, but simply to understand, with gentleness and curiosity, how your own mind works and how beautifully different each mind can be. In this video, we'll explore together the full spectrum of human intelligence, from those who navigate the world with profound support needs all the way to the rarest minds that reshape civilization itself. We'll move slowly through each level, meeting real experiences, understanding what life actually feels like at each point along this fascinating continuum. And I invite you to subscribe so we can continue this journey of understanding together, exploring the quiet complexities of how we think, feel, and make sense of this world. Let's begin gently at the beginning. Before we walk through each level of intelligence, it helps to pause for a moment and consider what intelligence actually means. You might notice, as you think about this question, that intelligence feels both obvious and mysteriously complex at the same time. We all sense it when we meet someone, that quick recognition of how they process information, how rapidly they connect ideas, how easily they navigate problems that would leave others stuck and searching. Psychologists have spent more than a century trying to capture this quality, trying to measure something that feels almost unmeasurable. In the early 1900s, a French psychologist named Alfred Binet was asked by the French government to identify children who might need extra educational support. He created a series of tasks, simple problems involving reasoning, memory, and comprehension, and noticed something remarkable. Some children solved these problems with ease, while others struggled considerably, regardless of their age or background. This observation led to what we now call the intelligence quotient, or IQ. The original formula was beautifully simple. Take a child's mental age, divide it by their chronological age, and multiply by 100. A child of 8 who reasoned like a 10-year-old would score 125. A child of 8 who reasoned like a 6-year-old would score 75. Over time, this system evolved, becoming more sophisticated, more nuanced, but the core idea remained. Intelligence, as measured by IQ, reflects how quickly and accurately your mind processes certain types of information, how well you recognize patterns, how effectively you hold multiple ideas in your working memory, and how skillfully you apply logic to novel situations. But here's something important to understand, something that settles gently into clarity when you really consider it. IQ measures a specific kind of intelligence. It captures what we might call analytical reasoning, the ability to solve puzzles, manipulate abstract concepts, and think logically through problems. It doesn't measure creativity in the fullest sense, or emotional wisdom, or the profound ability some people have to understand and connect with others. A person with an average IQ might compose music that moves thousands to tears, might raise children with extraordinary emotional intelligence, might build a business through sheer determination and people skills. Meanwhile, someone with a remarkably high IQ might struggle to maintain relationships, might feel perpetually out of step with the emotional rhythms of everyday life, might possess brilliant analytical gifts, while finding practical daily tasks surprisingly difficult. And so, as we move through these levels together, I invite you to hold this understanding lightly. These categories describe one dimension of human capability, important, yes, measurable, certainly, but never capturing the full beauty and complexity of what makes a person valuable, capable, or worthy of dignity and respect. Intelligence, when measured across large populations, follows what statisticians call a normal distribution, or more commonly, a bell curve. If you could gather the IQ scores of everyone in your city, or your country, or the entire world, and plot them on a graph, you would see a shape that rises gently in the middle and slopes down smoothly on either side. This bell curve tells us something both mathematical and deeply human. Most people, the vast majority of us, cluster around the center, what we call average intelligence, with scores between 90 and 110. About 68% of all people fall within this range, not struggling significantly, not exceptionally gifted, just navigating life with the cognitive tools that work well enough for most situations. As you move away from the center in either direction, the numbers drop quickly. About 13 to 14% of people fall into what we call low average intelligence, with IQ scores between 80 and 89. A similar percentage, another 13 to 14%, fall into high average intelligence, scoring between 110 and 119. Move further out, and the percentages shrink dramatically. Only about 2 to 3% of people reach what we call superior intelligence, with scores between 120 and 129. And the numbers continue dropping as we approach the outer edges, where truly exceptional minds exist in remarkably small numbers. This mathematical reality creates an interesting psychological phenomenon. Nearly everyone believes they fall above average, a statistical impossibility that psychologists call illusory superiority. We tend to notice our own strengths clearly while our limitations remain somewhat invisible to us, creating a gentle distortion in how we perceive our place on this spectrum. And perhaps that's not entirely a bad thing. A little bit of optimism about our own capabilities can carry us through difficult challenges, can help us persist when learning something new feels frustratingly hard, can protect our sense of self-worth in a world that often measures and compares. But for this exploration, I invite you to set aside that protective optimism just for a little while and consider, with genuine curiosity and gentleness, where you might actually fall and what that means and what it doesn't mean about your life and your worth. As we move through each level of intelligence in the sections ahead, we'll meet real experiences, real challenges, and real gifts that exist at every point along this spectrum. We'll begin with those who need the most support and slowly, patiently, make our way up through average intelligence, then superior, then exceptional, and finally to the rarest minds that exist at the very edges of human capability. At each level, we'll pause long enough to really understand, not just the number, but the lived experience. What does daily life actually feel like? What comes easily? What remains perpetually difficult? How do people at this level connect with others, find meaning, and navigate a world that doesn't always accommodate their particular way of thinking? And throughout this journey, I invite you to notice something. Every level carries both limitations and unexpected strengths. Every range includes people living meaningful lives, contributing to their communities, experiencing joy, connection, and purpose. Intelligence is not a measure of human value. It's simply one characteristic, like height or lung capacity or the ability to taste certain flavors. Some people are taller, some shorter, and life presents different challenges and advantages at every height. The same holds true for intelligence. So let's begin this exploration together with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to see the full, complicated, beautiful reality of how different minds work. And so we arrive, gently, at the beginning of the spectrum, where life requires the most support, and where dignity and meaning exist just as fully as anywhere else. Extremely low intelligence, IQ below 70. Imagine for a moment what life might look like when everyday tasks feel like solving a puzzle with no picture on the box. When the simple routines that most people perform without thinking, brushing teeth, making breakfast, finding the right bus stop, require conscious effort and careful guidance every single time. This is the reality for individuals with IQ scores below 70, a range that encompasses roughly 2 to 3% of the population. This level of intelligence often stems from identifiable conditions. Down syndrome, which affects about 1 in 700 Barbies born in the United States, remains one of the most common genetic causes. Fragile X syndrome, traumatic brain injuries during critical developmental periods, severe prenatal complications, or exposure to toxins during pregnancy can all result in cognitive functioning at this level. Life here rarely runs on autopilot, the kind of procedural memory that allows most people to tie their shoes while thinking about something completely different. That automatic quality doesn't develop as fully. Each step of a routine may need to be remembered consciously, practiced repeatedly, and sometimes prompted by others. But here's what often gets missed in clinical descriptions and diagnostic manuals. Emotional intelligence at this level can be surprisingly sometimes remarkably strong. Many individuals with extremely low cognitive intelligence possess an almost uncanny ability to read the emotional temperature of a room. They sense kindness, frustration, fear, or sadness long before words make these feelings explicit. Consider Maria, a woman in her 30s with Down syndrome and an IQ measured around 45. She lives in a group home with 4 other residents and requires support with most daily activities. She cannot read beyond a handful of sight words. Math beyond basic counting remains out of reach. She needs help selecting appropriate clothing for the weather, managing money, and remembering her daily medication schedule. But ask anyone who knows Maria about her gifts, and they'll tell you about her emotional radar. When another resident feels sad, Maria notices before the staff does. She'll sit quietly beside them, sometimes taking their hand, sometimes just being present. She doesn't offer advice or try to fix the problem. She simply stays, offering comfort through presence alone. This capacity for emotional attunement, for genuine connection that bypasses language and logic, represents a kind of intelligence that IQ tests simply don't measure. It doesn't make the cognitive limitations disappear. Maria will always need substantial support, but it does remind us that human value and human contribution come in forms that numbers cannot capture. Independence in the traditional sense may not be possible at this level, but meaning absolutely is. With patient support, consistent routines, and genuine respect for their dignity, individuals with extremely low intelligence can experience lives filled with connection, joy, moments of pride, and deep bonds with others. The key lies in meeting them where they are, not mourning where they aren't. When we stop focusing on what they cannot do and instead build on what brings them joy and engagement, their lives become fuller, richer, more authentically theirs. Borderline intelligence, IQ 70 to 79. This is the edge of independence, the space where capability and struggle exist side by side in almost equal measure. People with IQ scores between 70 and 79 occupy what psychologists call borderline intellectual functioning, and they represent about 6 to 7% of the population. Think of this as the "I can do it, just show me again" zone. With repetition, clear instructions, and structured support, individuals at this level can accomplish a great deal. They can live independently, hold jobs, manage households, and navigate the world with reasonable success. But abstract reasoning, complex problem-solving, and situations requiring mental flexibility often trip them up. School, for most people at this level, feels like running uphill while everyone else walks on flat ground. Reading comprehension beyond basic literal meaning becomes difficult. Math that requires holding multiple steps in working memory, long division, algebra, calculating percentages, feels overwhelmingly complex. Grammar rules that require understanding abstract concepts, like verb tense consistency or subjunctive mood, simply don't stick, no matter how many times teachers explain them. But give them hands-on practice, clear demonstrations, and concrete examples, and learning begins to click. They thrive in environments with structure, predictable schedules, routine tasks, and step-by-step processes they can follow. Consider James, who works at a large grocery store. His IQ tested at 76 when he was evaluated in high school. He struggled academically, barely graduating, and college was never a realistic option. But he's held the same job for 8 years now, stocking shelves, helping customers find items, and running a register during busy periods. The register work took him longer to learn than it takes most new employees. The manager had to break down each step, show him multiple times, and let him practice with supervision for several weeks. But once the routine settled in, James became reliable and consistent. He arrives on time, follows procedures carefully, and customers often comment on how friendly and helpful he is. Where James struggles is when things deviate from routine. If the computer system goes down and he needs to process returns manually, he gets confused and needs to call a supervisor. If a customer asks a complex question about comparing products or understanding sale prices with multiple discounts, he can't work through it quickly and often appears flustered. His coworkers have learned to step in during these moments, not with judgment, but with quiet assistance. They recognize his strengths, his reliability, his warm interactions with regular customers, and they cover his gaps without making him feel inadequate. Socially, many people at this level are outgoing, loyal, and emotionally intuitive. They might not engage in philosophical debates or discuss abstract political theories, but they notice when you're having a bad day. They remember your birthday. They show up when they say they will. They offer the kind of steady, uncomplicated friendship that can feel increasingly rare in a world of surface-level connections. The challenge for people with borderline intelligence often isn't their actual capability. It's the world's failure to recognize and accommodate their learning style. When given clarity, patience, and respect, they contribute meaningfully to their communities, build families, maintain friendships, and live lives of genuine purpose. Low average intelligence, IQ 80 to 89. This is the zone where things mostly work, but rarely feel easy. People with IQ scores between 80 and 89 fall into what psychologists call low average intelligence, representing about 13 to 14% of the population. That's roughly 1 in 7 people, far more common than most realize. Individuals at this level function independently in almost every meaningful way. They live alone, hold jobs, pay rent, maintain relationships, and navigate daily life without obvious struggle. To the outside observer, they look no different from anyone else. But internally, life often requires more mental effort, more time, more repetition than it does for those with average or above average intelligence. In school, these students typically didn't get pulled aside for special education services. Their struggles weren't severe enough to warrant intervention, but they weren't winning academic awards either. They sat in the middle or toward the bottom of the class, working harder than their peers for more modest results, often feeling vaguely inadequate without understanding why. For some, this in-between space stems from undiagnosed learning differences. Dyslexia, which affects reading fluency and decoding. Dyscalculia, which disrupts number sense and mathematical reasoning. Auditory processing disorders, which make it difficult to follow rapid or complex spoken instructions. Visual processing challenges that interfere with reading comprehension and spatial tasks. When these learning differences go unrecognized and unsupported, a person who might function in the average range with proper accommodations instead tests in the low average range. They're not less intelligent. Their brains simply process certain types of information differently, and without support, they fall behind. Consider Rachel, a 32-year-old administrative assistant. Her IQ tested at 87 during a workplace assessment after she requested accommodations. She struggled throughout school, barely passing math and science classes despite studying for hours. Reading took her twice as long as it took her classmates, and she often had to reread paragraphs multiple times before the meaning settled in. As an adult, she manages her job competently. She schedules appointments, answers phones, files documents, and handles basic correspondence. But tasks that require juggling multiple priorities simultaneously, like planning a complex event while managing incoming calls and responding to emails, leave her feeling overwhelmed and scattered. She's learned to cope by creating detailed checklists, using calendar reminders obsessively, and arriving early to work through tasks before the chaos of the day begins. Her colleagues see her as organized and reliable. They don't see the mental effort it takes to maintain that appearance, the constant anxiety that she'll forget something important, the exhaustion she feels at the end of each day. Socially, Rachel functions beautifully. She maintains close friendships, enjoys going out, engages in conversations about movies, relationships, and daily life with ease. People like her. They trust her. They have no idea she falls in the low average intelligence range, because intelligence in social settings often has less to do with IQ and more to do with emotional presence, humor, and genuine interest in others. This is the paradox of low average intelligence. People here live full, independent lives. They contribute to society, hold meaningful jobs, and build loving relationships. But they do it while working harder than most people realize, compensating for cognitive limitations that remain largely invisible to everyone around them. The key to thriving at this level isn't higher intelligence. It's self-awareness, the ability to recognize your limitations and build systems that support you. Rachel knows she needs checklists. James knows he needs routine. And both have found ways to structure their lives so their intelligence level becomes less of a barrier and more of a characteristic they've learned to work with. And in that working with, rather than against, they discover something important. Intelligence matters, yes, but persistence, self-awareness, and willingness to adapt matter just as much, sometimes more. Average intelligence, IQ 90 to 109. Here we arrive at the statistical center of human intelligence, the range where approximately 50% of all people live. If you randomly selected someone from a crowd, flipped a coin, this is where they would most likely land. And yet, if you asked that same crowd how many believe they fall into this category, far fewer hands would rise than mathematics would predict. This is the heart of illusory superiority, the quiet conviction most of us carry that we are just a bit sharper than average, a bit more insightful, a bit quicker on the uptake. But the numbers don't lie. Half of us are average, and the sooner we make peace with that reality, the sooner we can appreciate what average intelligence actually means. Average doesn't mean inadequate. It doesn't mean struggling or limited or lacking. It means capable, competent, and fully functional in nearly every domain of modern life. People with average intelligence graduate from college, though perhaps not from the most competitive universities. They become teachers, accountants, small business owners, nurses, electricians, sales managers, and office supervisors. They raise families, manage mortgages, plan vacations, and navigate the complex bureaucracies of modern existence with reasonable success. Consider the bell curve for a moment, really visualize it. The peak, the highest point where the most people cluster, sits right here at average. This is not the exception, this is the norm. This is the foundation upon which most of society functions. Most school principals fall into this range. Most accountants reviewing tax returns fall here. Most people managing rental properties, coordinating office schedules, or running local retail stores operate with average intelligence. And they do these jobs well, competently, reliably. The world runs on average intelligence far more than it runs on genius. But average intelligence comes with recognizable patterns, both strengths and limitations that tend to appear consistently across individuals in this range. People here can learn new skills and information, but it takes practice and repetition. A person with superior intelligence might watch a tutorial video once and grasp the concept. Someone with average intelligence typically needs to watch it several times, take notes, and practice before the skill becomes automatic. That's not a failure. That's simply how learning works at this level. Abstract reasoning exists but has boundaries. They can understand metaphors, engage with hypothetical scenarios, and think about concepts that aren't immediately concrete. But highly abstract philosophical discussions, advanced mathematics, or theoretical physics, these topics often feel slippery and hard to grasp fully. Problem-solving happens most effectively when the problem is clear and the potential solutions are somewhat familiar. Novel problems, situations that require thinking in entirely new ways, take longer to work through. There's often a moment of mental friction, a sense of "I need to think about this," before the path forward becomes clear. Memory works well for important, emotionally meaningful information, but less well for dense technical material or long strings of abstract data. A person with average intelligence can remember their anniversary, their children's schedules, and the plot of their favorite movie with ease. Ask them to memorize a list of 20 unrelated words or recall the specific details of a technical manual they read last week, and they'll struggle more noticeably. Socially and emotionally, people with average intelligence function beautifully. They read social cues, maintain friendships, navigate workplace dynamics, and build intimate relationships just as effectively as people with higher IQs. Intelligence and emotional wisdom are related but distinct capabilities, and many people with average cognitive intelligence possess profound emotional intelligence. Let me introduce you to Michelle, a 38-year-old elementary school teacher. She teaches third grade at a public school in a mid-sized city. Her IQ, measured during her college psychology course, came back at 102, solidly average. She didn't think much of it at the time, though a small part of her had hoped she'd score higher. Michelle is a good teacher, not exceptional, not revolutionary, but genuinely good. She follows the curriculum her district provides, uses teaching strategies she learned in her credential program, and manages her classroom with patience and warmth. Her students like her, parents trust her principal considers her reliable. But Michelle doesn't create groundbreaking new teaching methods. She doesn't publish research or speak at educational conferences. When her school adopts a new curriculum framework, she needs extensive professional development and peer support to implement it effectively. The theoretical underpinnings of educational philosophy, the debates about constructivism versus direct instruction, feel abstract and somewhat exhausting to her. What Michelle does beautifully is show up every day with consistency and care. She notices when a student is struggling, not just academically, but emotionally. She stays late to help kids who need extra support. She builds relationships with families and creates a classroom environment where children feel safe enough to make mistakes. Her intelligence serves her well in this role because teaching elementary school doesn't require genius. It requires patience, organization, emotional attunement, and the ability to break complex skills into manageable steps. Michelle has all of that. Her average intelligence is more than sufficient for the life she's built. Outside of work, Michelle manages her household, pays bills on time, plans family vacations, helps her own children with homework up to a certain point. She admits math beyond basic algebra leaves her feeling lost, and maintains an active social life. She reads novels, not academic journals. She watches documentaries occasionally, but prefers lighter entertainment. She discusses current events with friends, but doesn't dive deeply into political theory. She represents, in many ways, the backbone of functional society. Not the innovators or the intellectual leaders, but the steady, competent, reliable majority who keep institutions running, children cared for, and communities connected. And here's what matters most. Michelle is content. She doesn't spend her days wishing she was smarter or comparing herself unfavorably to colleagues with advanced degrees. She knows her strengths, accepts her limitations, and has built a life that fits who she actually is. This is the gift of average intelligence when it's embraced rather than resisted. You're smart enough to do most things competently. You're not so unusual that you feel alienated from others. You fit comfortably into the social and professional structures that society has built because those structures were designed, quite literally, with you in mind. High average intelligence, IQ 110 to 119. Just above the center of the bell curve, we find high average intelligence, a range that encompasses about 13 to 14% of the population. This is the go-to zone, the range of people you instinctively ask to check your work, run the meeting, or organize the complicated group project. They're sharp, steady, and dependable. People at this level don't just get things done, they get things done right. They notice details others miss, anticipate problems before they fully emerge, and bring a level of thoroughness to tasks that makes them invaluable in professional settings. In school, this group often landed near the top of the class, maybe not valedictorian, but on a roll consistently. They were the students who understood material quickly, needed less repetition than their average peers, and could apply what they learned to new situations with relative ease. College, for most people at this level, felt challenging but manageable. They might not have sailed through effortlessly, but they graduated with solid GPAs and genuine mastery of their fields. As adults, many gravitate toward roles that reward precision, judgment, and reliability. You'll find them in upper management positions, running departments with efficiency and foresight. They become project coordinators who somehow keep all the moving pieces organized. They work in finance, where attention to detail and pattern recognition matter enormously. They succeed in technical fields, engineering, IT, healthcare, where competence and thoroughness are more valuable than brilliance. The cognitive difference between high average and average intelligence might seem small on paper, just 10 to 20 IQ points, but in practice, it shows up clearly. People with high average intelligence process information faster, hold more variables in working memory simultaneously, and make connections between ideas more readily. Where someone with average intelligence needs to review material 2 or 3 times, someone with high average intelligence grasps it on the first pass. Let me introduce you to David, a 45-year-old senior financial analyst at a regional banking institution. His IQ tested at 117 during a comprehensive assessment he undertook in his 30s out of simple curiosity. He always knew he was smart, but he also knew he wasn't the smartest person in any room. David excels at his job because it plays directly to his cognitive strengths. He analyzes market trends, evaluates investment portfolios, and makes recommendations about asset allocation. The work requires holding multiple variables in mind simultaneously, recognizing patterns in complex data sets, and thinking several steps ahead about potential market movements. His colleagues respect him deeply. When they're confused about a regulatory change or trying to interpret a complicated financial report, they come to David. He has a gift for breaking down complexity into understandable pieces, for seeing the implications others miss, and for catching errors before they become problems. But David also recognizes his ceiling. He works alongside a few colleagues with IQs likely in the superior or very superior range, and he notices the difference. They formulate innovative financial models from scratch. They publish papers in academic journals. They're recruited by prestigious firms to lead research divisions. David does excellent work within existing frameworks, but he doesn't create new frameworks. He optimizes systems, he doesn't revolutionize them. This recognition doesn't diminish him. He's made peace with being very good rather than exceptional. His income is substantial, his job is secure, and his expertise is valued. He's smart enough to solve complex problems, but not so far outside the norm that he feels socially or professionally isolated. Socially, people with high average intelligence often navigate relationships with ease. They're articulate, interesting conversationalists who can discuss a wide range of topics with genuine insight. They read widely, stay current with news and culture, and bring thoughtful perspectives to discussions. But they're also grounded enough to connect with people across the intelligence spectrum without coming across as pretentious or out of touch. There's one quirk that shows up frequently at this level: the documentary enthusiast who won't stop talking about their latest obsession. You know this person. They watch one documentary about volcanoes, or space exploration, or medieval architecture, and suddenly it's all they can talk about for a week. They've absorbed the information quickly, found it fascinating, and they want to share that fascination with everyone around them, whether or not those people share their enthusiasm. This pattern reveals something important about high average intelligence. There's enough cognitive capacity to become genuinely interested in complex topics, to understand them fairly deeply, and to want to engage intellectually with ideas. But there's not always the social calibration to recognize when that enthusiasm exceeds other people's interest level. High average intelligence is, in many ways, the sweet spot of the bell curve. You're smart enough to handle complexity, successful enough to build a secure and comfortable life, and still normal enough to fit in socially without feeling like an outsider. You're the person people rely on, the one who makes things work smoothly, the one who bridges the gap between vision and execution. Superior intelligence, IQ 120 to 129. Here something shifts. We move beyond competence and reliability into a range where thinking accelerates noticeably. People with IQ scores between 120 and 129, representing roughly 6 to 7% of the population, process information at a speed that sets them apart from the majority of people they encounter daily. This is superior intelligence, and the label fits. These individuals don't just solve problems efficiently. They often see solutions before others have finished understanding the question. They draw associations between seemingly unrelated concepts almost instantly. They recognize patterns in data, in human behavior, in complex systems, long before those patterns become obvious to everyone else. But this cognitive speed comes with a cost, particularly in childhood and adolescence, when mental processing outpaces emotional and social development. A child with superior intelligence might be reading at a college level by age 8, but they're still 8 years old emotionally. They can discuss complex scientific concepts, but they still cry when they feel left out at recess. This disconnect creates a peculiar kind of loneliness. Young people at this level often feel out of sync with their peers. Conversations in the cafeteria feel unbearably slow and shallow. The things their classmates care about, which celebrities are dating, the drama of who said what to whom, feel trivial and exhausting. They crave intellectual stimulation and depth, but they're surrounded by people whose minds simply don't work at the same pace. This doesn't make them better than their peers. It makes them different, and different, especially in childhood, often means lonely. Many learn to hide their intelligence, to deliberately slow down their speech, to pretend they don't know the answer even when it's blazingly obvious to them. They learn that being smart can make you unpopular, that intellectual intensity can push people away. As adults, many people with superior intelligence find professional homes where their cognitive gifts are valued rather than resented. They become analysts who can hold enormous amounts of complex data in their minds and extract meaningful insights. They work as engineers, designing systems that require visualizing multiple interconnected components simultaneously. They practice law, particularly in areas like constitutional law or corporate litigation, where the ability to construct intricate logical arguments and anticipate counterarguments matters enormously. They excel in scientific research, where hypothesis generation and experimental design require both creativity and rigorous analytical thinking. Let me introduce you to Sarah, a 34-year-old software engineer at a major tech company. Her IQ tested at 126 during a comprehensive evaluation in high school, prompted by her parents' concern that she seemed depressed and socially isolated despite her academic excellence. Sarah was reading chapter books by age 4, teaching herself basic algebra by age 9, and finishing high school calculus with perfect scores while her classmates struggled with basic concepts. She graduated as valedictorian, but she gave her speech to a group of peers who had barely spoken to her throughout 4 years of high school. College was better. She found other students who cared about ideas, who wanted to talk about algorithms and computational theory, who didn't look at her strangely when she got excited about an elegant proof. But even there, she noticed she was often the quickest in the room, the one who saw the solution several steps ahead, the one professors called on when they wanted to demonstrate a complex concept. Now in her professional life, Sarah thrives technically. She writes clean, efficient code. She debugs complex systems with a kind of intuitive understanding of where problems hide. She designs software architecture that her colleagues admire for its elegance and scalability. Her annual performance reviews consistently rate her as exceptional. But socially, even in adulthood, things remain complicated. Sarah struggles with small talk. She finds it almost physically painful to discuss whether weekend plans or reality television. When conversations turn to topics she finds intellectually engaging, she sometimes overwhelms people with the depth and speed of her thinking. She'll launch into a detailed explanation of why a particular approach to machine learning is flawed, complete with technical reasoning and references to recent research papers, only to notice her colleagues' eyes glazing over. She doesn't mean to dominate conversations or make people feel inadequate. Her mind simply moves quickly, and once she's engaged with an interesting problem, she wants to explore it fully. But this intensity can make her seem arrogant or socially tone-deaf, even though internally she's just excited to discuss ideas with someone. Dating has been particularly challenging. Sarah finds most people intellectually unstimulating. She knows this sounds elitist, and she hates that about herself, but she can't force genuine interest in conversations that feel surface-level and predictable. The few relationships she's had usually followed a pattern. Initial excitement when she met someone intelligent and interesting, followed by gradual recognition that even smart partners sometimes found her exhausting, too intense, too focused on abstractions, not present enough in the simple emotional moments that relationships require. This is one of the hidden challenges of superior intelligence. You're smart enough that most people feel noticeably slower to you, which creates distance and frustration. But you're not so rare that you easily find a community of intellectual peers. You exist in an awkward middle ground, too smart to fit comfortably in average social circles, not quite exceptional enough to find your tribe waiting for you. The key to thriving at this level often involves learning something that doesn't come naturally. Learning to listen, truly listen, even when you've already formulated the complete answer. Learning to slow down your speech and thought process when talking with others, not because they're inadequate, but because connection requires meeting people where they are. Learning that being right isn't the same as being wise, and that relationships require emotional presence, not just intellectual horsepower. Sarah has been working on this, consciously and deliberately, for several years now. She practices asking questions instead of offering solutions. She reminds herself that her colleague's story about their child's soccer game matters, not because it's intellectually stimulating, but because sharing these small moments builds trust and connection. She's learning, slowly, that intelligence without emotional attunement creates a lonely life, regardless of how successful you become professionally. Very superior intelligence. IQ 130 to 144. We've now entered the range that earns the formal designation gifted, a term that carries both recognition and burden. People with IQ scores between 130 and 144 represent roughly 2% of the population. If you gathered 100 random people in a room, statistically only 2 would fall into this range. This is where abstract reasoning becomes almost effortless. New skills settle in after minimal exposure. Complex systems reveal their underlying structures with surprising clarity. These are the minds that don't just learn quickly, they synthesize, create, and innovate in ways that distinguish them clearly from even those with superior intelligence. In childhood, many of these individuals were labeled intense, a word that captures both their intellectual veracity and their emotional complexity. They asked endless questions that exhausted their parents. Why is the sky blue? But why do those wavelengths scatter more? But what determines wavelength? But what's light made of? But what are photons? Each answer spawned 3 new questions, creating recursive loops of curiosity that never seemed to end. They taught themselves to read before kindergarten. Not because anyone pushed them, but because they were desperate to access information independently. They finished their schoolwork in a fraction of the time it took classmates and then sat, bored and restless, waiting for everyone else to catch up. Some were lucky enough to have teachers who recognized their needs and provided enrichment. Others spent years in a kind of intellectual prison, forced to move at a pace that felt agonizingly slow. Some, though not all, show traits that overlap with what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, now folded into the broader category of autism spectrum disorder. There's a subset of very superior intelligence that comes packaged with intense focus on specific interests, difficulty reading social cues, sensitivity to sensory input, and a preference for systems and patterns over emotional nuance. It's important to understand that high intelligence and autism are not the same thing. Plenty of people with very superior intelligence are socially skilled, emotionally attuned, and neurotypical. And plenty of people on the autism spectrum have average or below average IQ scores. But there is a meaningful overlap, a particular profile where exceptional analytical ability coexists with social challenges and sensory sensitivities. As adults, people with very superior intelligence often gravitate toward professions that reward depth of expertise and precision of thought. They become surgeons, particularly in specialties like neurosurgery or cardiothoracic surgery, where spatial reasoning and the ability to make split-second decisions based on complex variables can mean the difference between life and death. They practice as constitutional lawyers, parsing the intricate logic of legal precedent and constructing arguments that require holding multiple levels of interpretation simultaneously. They work as research scientists, theoretical physicists, mathematicians, and academics, exploring questions that most people find impenetrably abstract. Let me introduce you to Marcus, a 41-year-old neurosurgeon at a major university hospital. His IQ tested at 138 when he was evaluated as part of a gifted program in elementary school. Even as a young child, Marcus understood concepts that left his teachers scrambling to keep up. He taught himself calculus from library books in 6th grade. He built functioning robots from spare electronics by age 12. He graduated high school at 15 and completed his undergraduate degree in neuroscience by 18. Medical school and surgical residency were intellectually demanding, but Marcus thrived on the complexity. He loved the intricate architecture of the brain, the way tiny structures controlled vast aspects of human experience. He found deep satisfaction in the precision required for surgery, the steady hands and razor-sharp focus needed to navigate millimeters from critical neural pathways. Professionally, Marcus is exceptional. He performs surgeries that other neurosurgeons refer to him because they're too complex, too risky, too technically demanding. He publishes research regularly in top-tier journals. He teaches residents and fellows, though some find his teaching style challenging because he moves through material so quickly and becomes impatient when they don't grasp concepts immediately. But Marcus's personal life tells a different story. He's been married once, briefly, in his late 20s. His wife, a fellow physician, eventually told him that living with him felt like living with a brilliant computer rather than a human being. He analyzed everything, she said. He approached emotional conversations like problems to be solved rather than experiences to be shared. When she was upset, he offered logical solutions instead of empathy. When she wanted to talk about feelings, he retreated into abstractions. The divorce hurt him deeply, more than he knew how to express. He recognized, intellectually, that he had contributed to the relationship's failure, but understanding something intellectually and being able to change ingrained patterns of thinking are entirely different challenges. Marcus has a small circle of friends, mostly other physicians and researchers, who share his intellectual interests. They discuss medical cases, debate treatment protocols, and argue about research methodology over drinks. These friendships work because they're built on shared professional interests rather than emotional intimacy. But Marcus also feels lonely in ways he struggles to articulate. He wants deeper connections. He wants to be understood, not just respected. He wants someone to know him, the person beneath the professional achievements, but he doesn't quite know how to let people in. His mind, which serves him so brilliantly in his work, sometimes feels like a barrier to the very connection he craves. This is the paradox of very superior intelligence. The same cognitive intensity that enables extraordinary professional achievement can interfere profoundly with emotional intimacy and social connection. The mind that dissects complex problems with ease sometimes struggles with the ambiguity, irrationality, and emotional messiness that relationships require. People at this level often find themselves caught between worlds. They're too intellectually intense for most social groups, where their analytical approach to conversation can feel alienating. But they're also often too focused on their specialized fields to connect easily even with other highly intelligent people whose expertise lies in different domains. And then there's the quirk that almost everyone at this level recognizes in themselves, the ability to launch into detailed explanations of complex topics at the slightest provocation. You ask Marcus a simple question about why headaches happen, and suddenly you're getting a 15-minute lecture on neurovascular coupling, cortical spreading depression, and the trigeminal system. You mention you're tired, and he's explaining circadian rhythm regulation, adenosine receptor dynamics, and the neurobiology of sleep homeostasis. He doesn't do this to show off. He does it because his mind naturally moves toward depth and complexity, and once engaged with an interesting question, he genuinely wants to explore it fully. But to the person who just wanted a simple answer, it can feel overwhelming, even condescending. The path to a fulfilling life at this level of intelligence often requires something counterintuitive. It requires learning to value and cultivate abilities that don't come naturally. Emotional intelligence, social awareness, the capacity to sit with ambiguity without immediately trying to resolve it, the willingness to engage with people on their terms rather than your own. Marcus is working on this now, seeing a therapist who specializes in helping highly intelligent individuals develop better emotional and social skills. It's uncomfortable work. His mind resists it because these skills don't follow clear logical rules. But he's beginning to understand that intelligence without connection creates a hollow kind of success, impressive on paper but lonely in lived experience. Exceptionally gifted, IQ 145 to 159. We've arrived now at a range that was, for most of the 20th century, simply called genius. People with IQ scores between 145 and 159 represent roughly 0.1% of the population, approximately 1 in every 1,000 people. If you live in a city of 100,000, statistically, there are only about 100 people at this level walking among you. These minds don't just learn quickly or solve problems efficiently. They leap. They make intuitive connections across domains that seem entirely unrelated. They see solutions that appear almost magical to everyone else, not because they've worked through every logical step, but because their pattern recognition operates at a level that bypasses conventional reasoning. From early childhood, you could spot them if you knew what to look for. While other children were still figuring out how toys worked, these children were taking them apart and rebuilding them with improvements. They weren't just curious about how things functioned, they were driven to understand the underlying principles and then apply those principles in novel ways. They taught themselves to read at 3 or 4, not from flashcards or parental pressure, but from sheer determination to access information independently. By early elementary school, many were reading several grade levels ahead, not assigned books, but whatever they could find that interested them: encyclopedias, technical manuals, classic literature, scientific journals they found in libraries. Mathematics, for many at this level, felt less like a subject to study and more like a language they already spoke. They grasped algebraic concepts in elementary school, moved through calculus in middle school, and often started exploring higher mathematics, number theory, topology, abstract algebra, by high school, driven by genuine fascination rather than academic requirements. Music and composition came naturally to some. They could hear a piece once and reproduce it, or better yet, create variations that enhanced the original. They understood harmonic relationships intuitively, composed complex pieces before they'd had formal training, and heard music in their minds constantly, an internal soundtrack that never fully quieted. For others, the gift showed up in language, writing stories with sophisticated narrative structures and psychological depth, while their peers were still writing simple book reports. Or in visual arts, creating drawings with perspective and composition that suggested formal training they'd never received. Or in mechanical reasoning, building functional machines from household items without blueprints or instructions. But here's what often gets missed in stories about exceptional intelligence. Early brilliance doesn't always translate into groundbreaking achievement. Some of these children grow into adults who change the world. Others become highly successful professionals who live comfortable but relatively conventional lives. And some struggle profoundly, their exceptional minds creating expectations they can't meet or leading them down paths that society doesn't value or reward. The difference often lies not in intelligence itself, but in a constellation of other factors: drive and persistence, emotional resilience, the ability to focus intense mental energy on a single domain long enough to master it deeply, access to opportunities and resources, the good fortune of being born in a time and place where their particular gifts are valued, and sometimes simply luck. Let me introduce you to Dr. Jennifer Chen, a 38-year-old research physicist at a national laboratory. Her IQ tested at 152 when she was evaluated in second grade after her teacher noticed she was teaching herself calculus from a textbook she'd found in the library. Jennifer's childhood was marked by intense intellectual hunger and equally intense social isolation. She skipped 2 grades, which put her physically and emotionally out of sync with her classmates. She spent lunch periods in the library, not because she was bullied, but because she simply had nothing in common with children 2 years older who were themselves navigating adolescence, while she remained a child intellectually but not emotionally. Her parents, both immigrants who worked long hours in practical professions, didn't quite know what to do with her. They were proud, certainly, but also somewhat bewildered. They couldn't help with her homework past elementary school. They couldn't engage with her interests in quantum mechanics or theoretical physics. They loved her deeply but didn't fully understand her. College was transformative. For the first time, Jennifer found peers who could keep up with her intellectually. She double-majored in physics and mathematics, completed both degrees in 3 years, and entered a PhD program at a top university at age 19. Her dissertation research, focusing on novel approaches to quantum computing, earned her recognition in the field and multiple job offers. Now she leads a research team exploring the boundaries of quantum information theory. She's published dozens of papers in prestigious journals. She's been invited to speak at international conferences. She holds several patents that may, eventually, contribute to the development of practical quantum computers. Her work excites her in ways that nothing else does. When she's deep in a problem, hours pass without her noticing. Her mind enters a state of flow where complex mathematics unfolds almost effortlessly, where she can hold multiple layers of abstraction simultaneously and manipulate them like physical objects. This is where her exceptional intelligence shines most brightly, in her ability to think about problems that would overwhelm most minds, even very intelligent ones. But Jennifer's life outside of work remains complicated. She's in a long-term relationship with another physicist, someone whose IQ is likely similar to hers, and even with that intellectual compatibility, they struggle sometimes to connect emotionally. Both tend toward analytical thinking about everything, including their relationship. They discuss their feelings like they're debugging code, systematically, logically, with an almost clinical detachment that sometimes misses the point entirely. Jennifer has few close friends outside of her professional circle. She finds most social interactions exhausting, not because she dislikes people, but because small talk feels like speaking a language she never fully learned. She can do it when necessary, at departmental gatherings or professional conferences, but it drains her energy rapidly. After an hour of casual socializing, she needs to retreat somewhere quiet to recover. She's also aware of something that troubles her occasionally. Her exceptional intelligence has given her access to opportunities and achievements that bring respect and financial security. But it hasn't made her happy, not in any simple or straightforward way. She experiences deep satisfaction in her work, moments of almost transcendent joy when a difficult problem yields to her analysis. But everyday life often feels flat, unstimulating, vaguely disappointing in ways she struggles to articulate. This is a pattern that appears frequently at this level of intelligence. The same mental intensity that enables extraordinary achievement also creates extraordinarily high standards for engagement. Conversations need to be intellectually stimulating to feel worthwhile. Problems need to be genuinely challenging to generate interest. Routine tasks feel almost unbearably tedious. And there's another challenge that Jennifer has encountered repeatedly throughout her career. Her mind moves so quickly, makes leaps so intuitively, that she often struggles to explain her reasoning to others, even to other intelligent people. She sees the solution, she knows it's correct, but articulating all the intermediate steps requires slowing down her thinking in ways that feel unnatural and effortful. This has caused problems in collaborative work. Colleagues sometimes feel dismissed when she proposes solutions without showing her work. Graduate students find her difficult to learn from because she skips steps that seem obvious to her but aren't obvious to anyone else. She's had to learn, deliberately and with considerable effort, to slow down, to backtrack, to explain not just what she knows, but how she knows it. People at this level often face a choice, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. They can focus their exceptional intelligence on a single domain, diving deeper and deeper into specialized knowledge until they become world experts. This path leads to professional success, recognition within their field, and the satisfaction of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Or they can remain intellectuals in the broader sense, cultivating wide-ranging interests, reading across disciplines, thinking about connections between fields. This path offers intellectual stimulation and the pleasure of seeing patterns across domains, but it rarely leads to the kind of concrete achievements that society rewards most. Jennifer chose depth over breadth, specialization over generalization. She sometimes wonders what her life would have looked like if she'd made different choices. Would she be happier if she'd pursued a less demanding career, one that left more mental energy for relationships and personal interests? Would she feel more connected if she'd learned to value emotional intelligence as much as analytical intelligence? She doesn't have clear answers to these questions. What she knows is that her mind works the way it works, and she's built a life that honors that reality. She's made peace with being exceptional in ways that create both opportunity and isolation. She's learned that intelligence, even exceptional intelligence, is just one aspect of a fully human life, and that the other aspects, connection, meaning, joy, simple contentment, require different kinds of wisdom. Profoundly gifted, IQ 160 and above. We've reached the outer edge of the bell curve, the range so rare that standard IQ tests often can't measure it accurately. Most tests top out around 160, not because intelligence doesn't extend beyond that point, but because the tests themselves can't reliably distinguish between different levels of exceptional ability at the extreme high end. People with IQ scores of 160 and above represent approximately 0.003% of the population. That's roughly 1 in 30,000 people. In a city of 1 million, there are perhaps 30 to 35 individuals at this level. In the entire United States, maybe 10,000 people. Globally, perhaps 250,000 out of nearly 8 billion. These are the minds that don't just think outside the box. They see the box as an arbitrary construct, question why it exists in its current form, envision entirely different frameworks, and then create new systems that render the original box obsolete. This is Einstein-level genius, Newton-level brilliance, the realm of minds that unlock fundamental secrets about the nature of reality, that see patterns no one else sees, that make leaps of insight that seem, to everyone else, like either madness or magic. Think about what Isaac Newton accomplished. In his early 20s, during a period of about 18 months while Cambridge University was closed due to plague, he developed calculus because the existing mathematics wasn't sufficient for what he wanted to understand. He formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation, fundamentally changing how humans understood the physical world. He conducted experiments in optics that revealed the nature of light and color. 18 months, multiple fields, revolutionary discoveries. Or consider Srinivasa Ramanujan, an Indian mathematician born into poverty with minimal formal training, who filled notebooks with thousands of mathematical formulas and theorems that seemed to emerge fully formed from his intuition. Many of his discoveries were so far ahead of the mathematics of his time that it took decades for other mathematicians to prove them or even fully understand what he'd seen. Ada Lovelace, working in the mid-1800s on Charles Babbage's theoretical analytical engine, wrote what's now recognized as the first computer algorithm, a century before computers existed. She envisioned the potential for machines to go beyond pure calculation to create music, art, and complex analysis, insights that wouldn't be realized until the digital age. Leonardo da Vinci sketched designs for helicopters, submarines, and parachutes in the 15th century, centuries before the technology existed to build them. He dissected human bodies to understand anatomy with a precision that wouldn't be matched for generations. He painted masterpieces that continue to captivate viewers 500 years later. He was, in the truest sense, a polymath, someone whose exceptional intelligence manifested across multiple domains simultaneously. What distinguishes profoundly gifted minds isn't just that they're smart, it's that they think in fundamentally different ways than even very intelligent people think. They see connections across disciplines that seem unrelated. They recognize deep structural patterns that underlie seemingly different phenomena. They intuit solutions before they can prove them logically, and often their intuition leads them to truths that formal reasoning alone wouldn't reveal. But profound intelligence at this level also comes with profound challenges, particularly when it appears in a world not designed to accommodate it. Many profoundly gifted individuals experience childhoods marked by isolation and misunderstanding. They were too different, too intense, too far outside the normal range for teachers, parents, or peers to fully grasp what they needed. Some were fortunate enough to find mentors who recognized their gifts and provided appropriate challenge and support. Others spent years feeling fundamentally alone, unable to find anyone who understood how their minds worked. School, for many, ranged from boring to torturous. The pace felt glacially slow. The curriculum seemed designed for different minds entirely. Many taught themselves far more than school ever taught them, reading voraciously, conducting experiments, pursuing questions that fascinated them regardless of whether anyone encouraged or supported that pursuit. Socially, the challenges often persisted into adulthood. Profound intelligence creates a communication gap that's difficult to bridge. When your natural mode of thinking involves multiple layers of abstraction, complex systems, and connections across disciplines, having a simple conversation about everyday topics can feel almost impossible. It's not arrogance. It's more like speaking a language that has far more words, more nuanced distinctions, more grammatical complexity than the language everyone else speaks. Some profoundly gifted individuals learn to code switch, to shift their communication style depending on context, to translate their complex thinking into simpler terms when talking with people who think differently. But this translation requires constant effort and can feel exhausting, like perpetually operating in a second language. Others never fully develop this skill. They remain intellectually isolated, able to communicate clearly only with the small number of people whose minds work at a similar level. This creates a strange kind of loneliness, being surrounded by people but unable to truly connect with most of them. Let me introduce you to Dr. Michael Zhao, though that's not his real name. He's 52 years old, a mathematician working in an extremely specialized area of abstract algebra. His IQ has never been formally measured, but based on his cognitive profile and achievements, experts who have worked with him estimate it's likely above 170. Michael was reading fluently at age 2. By 4, he was working through elementary mathematics on his own. By 7, he'd exhausted the mathematics curriculum at his school and was working with a university professor who provided him with advanced textbooks. By 12, he was taking graduate-level courses. He completed his PhD at 19 with a dissertation that opened up entirely new areas of research in his field. Now he's one of perhaps 24 people in the world working at the frontier of his particular mathematical specialty. His papers are read by a handful of colleagues who can understand them. His work has no immediate practical application, no commercial value, no clear connection to anything most people would recognize as useful. But Michael doesn't care about usefulness in the conventional sense. He's driven by something deeper and more fundamental, the desire to understand the underlying structures of mathematics, to discover truths that exist independently of human invention, to push the boundaries of what's known into the territory of what can be known. His life looks strange from the outside. He works from home most days, spending 8 to 12 hours thinking, scribbling equations, staring at his whiteboard, occasionally making small adjustments to his calculations. He has almost no social life outside of professional conferences and collaborations. He's never married, never had a long-term relationship that worked. He has a few close colleagues he communicates with regularly, other mathematicians working in related fields, but even those relationships are built almost entirely around their shared intellectual interests. People who don't know him well sometimes assume he must be on the autism spectrum, and he might be, though he's never sought a diagnosis. He displays many characteristics: intense focus on narrow interests, difficulty with social interaction, preference for routine and predictability, sensitivity to sensory input. But disentangling what might be autism from what's simply the result of profound intelligence operating in a world not designed for it feels nearly impossible. What Michael knows about himself is this: his mind works in ways that bring him deep satisfaction and equally deep isolation. When he's immersed in a mathematical problem, he experiences something approaching transcendence, a state where the boundaries between himself and the abstract structures he's exploring seem to dissolve. He sees patterns, relationships, and structures with a clarity that feels almost mystical. But when he steps away from his work and tries to engage with ordinary life, shopping for groceries, talking to neighbors, navigating the social expectations of everyday existence, he feels clumsy and out of place. The same mind that can hold incredibly complex abstractions struggles with the simple question, "How are you?" Because the honest answer is too complicated, too strange, too far outside normal conversational norm. Michael sometimes wonders whether his profound intelligence has given him a better life or a more difficult one. He's achieved things that perhaps only a few dozen people in history could achieve. He's pushed human knowledge forward in ways that may not be recognized for decades or centuries. But he's also lived a life marked by persistent loneliness, by the sense of being fundamentally different from almost everyone he encounters, by the challenge of finding meaning and connection in a world that rarely understands or values what he does. This is the paradox at the far edge of the intelligence spectrum. Profound giftedness opens doors to extraordinary achievement and deep intellectual satisfaction, but it also creates barriers to the simple human experiences that make life feel full and meaningful for most people: friendship, intimacy, belonging, the sense of being understood and accepted for who you are. The profoundly gifted often face a choice about how to use their exceptional minds. They can pursue the absolute cutting edge of their field, diving into problems so specialized and abstract that only a handful of people can even understand what they're working on. This path leads to the greatest possible intellectual satisfaction and the potential for truly revolutionary contributions to human knowledge. But it also tends toward isolation, both intellectual and social. Or they can choose to apply their intelligence to problems with clearer practical applications, to teaching, to communicating complex ideas to broader audiences, to using their gifts in service of more immediately recognizable goals. This path offers more connection to the broader world, more recognition and appreciation, and often more conventional markers of success. But it may also leave them feeling that they're not fully using their capabilities, that they're operating below their potential. There's no right answer to this choice. Both paths have value, both come with trade-offs. The key is recognizing that profound intelligence, like all forms of human diversity, creates both opportunities and challenges, both gifts and burdens. And perhaps the deepest wisdom for the profoundly gifted, and for all of us seeking to understand them, is this: intelligence, even at its most exceptional levels, is only one dimension of human experience. A fully lived life requires many forms of wisdom: emotional, social, practical, and spiritual. The person with an IQ of 170, who's learned to cultivate compassion, humility, and genuine connection with others, has achieved something just as remarkable as any intellectual breakthrough. The challenge and the invitation is to honor the gift of exceptional intelligence without allowing it to become a prison, to use it fully while also developing the other capacities that make us human, to recognize that being profoundly gifted doesn't make you more valuable than anyone else. It simply makes you different, and that difference, like all differences, deserves understanding, support, and respect. What intelligence reveals and what it conceals. We've walked together now through the full spectrum of human intelligence, from those who need the most support to navigate daily life, all the way to the rarest minds that reshape how humanity understands reality itself. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, you might notice something that's been present all along, something that becomes clearer when you see the whole landscape rather than isolated points along it. Intelligence, as measured by IQ, predicts certain things quite reliably. It predicts how quickly you'll learn new academic material, how well you'll perform on tests that require abstract reasoning, how easily you'll grasp complex logical relationships, and to some degree, how successfully you'll navigate educational systems and certain professional environments that reward analytical thinking. But intelligence, even exceptional intelligence, doesn't predict happiness. It doesn't predict life satisfaction, the quality of your relationships, your capacity for joy, or your sense of meaning and purpose. These dimensions of human experience follow different logic entirely, drawing on capabilities that IQ tests simply don't measure. Consider what we've seen at each level. Maria, with her IQ around 45, experiences profound connection with others through emotional attunement that many highly intelligent people struggle to develop. James, in the borderline range, brings reliability, warmth, and steady friendship to everyone in his life. Michelle, with her solidly average intelligence, has built a meaningful career helping children learn and grow, touching hundreds of young lives over decades of patient teaching. David, with his high average intelligence, has achieved professional success and financial security while maintaining the social connection and groundedness that sometimes eludes those with higher IQs. Sarah, with superior intelligence, excels technically but recognizes that her cognitive gifts have sometimes been barriers to the emotional intimacy she craves. Marcus, in the very superior range, saves lives with his surgical skill, but has struggled to build the personal relationships that would make his life feel complete. Jennifer, exceptionally gifted, pushes the boundaries of human knowledge in quantum physics while navigating the loneliness that comes from thinking in ways that few others can follow. And Michael, profoundly gifted, experiences almost mystical connection with abstract mathematical structures while feeling perpetually disconnected from the ordinary social world. Every level carries gifts, every level carries challenges, and the relationship between intelligence and life quality isn't linear. It isn't a simple matter of higher being better. In fact, there's research suggesting that life satisfaction peaks somewhere in the above average to superior range, roughly between IQ 115 and 130. People in this range are intelligent enough to access good educational and professional opportunities, to solve complex problems effectively, and to engage with ideas in meaningful ways. But they're not so far outside the norm that they struggle to find social connection or feel perpetually out of sync with the world around them. Move below that range, and life often becomes more difficult in practical ways. Financial security becomes harder to achieve. Complex bureaucracies become more difficult to navigate. Educational opportunities become more limited. These practical challenges create real stress and real limitations. But move too far above that range, and different challenges emerge. Social isolation increases. The gap between your natural pace of thinking and most people's pace becomes a constant friction. The intensity of your intellectual needs makes it harder to find simple contentment in everyday experiences, and the expectations that come with exceptional intelligence from yourself and from others can create a pressure that feels unbearable. There's a particular kind of suffering that often appears in highly intelligent individuals, the sense of wasted potential, the feeling that you're not living up to your capabilities, that you should be achieving more, contributing more, becoming the version of yourself that your intelligence seems to promise. This suffering is real and painful, but it's also based on a fundamental misunderstanding about what intelligence means and what it requires. Having a high IQ is like having a high-performance engine in your car. It gives you the potential to go fast, to handle complex maneuvers, to perform at levels that ordinary engines can't match. But the engine alone doesn't determine whether you'll actually go anywhere meaningful. You also need fuel, direction, road conditions, a destination worth reaching, and the discipline to maintain the vehicle over time. Intelligence is the engine, but achievement, the kind of groundbreaking contribution that changes fields or transforms understanding, requires many other elements. It requires motivation, the drive to work on difficult problems even when progress feels impossibly slow. It requires perseverance, the willingness to fail repeatedly and keep going. It requires opportunity, access to education, mentorship, resources, and environments where your particular talents can develop and flourish. It requires focus, the ability to channel your mental energy into a single domain long enough to develop genuine expertise rather than scattering your attention across many interests. It requires emotional resilience, the capacity to handle criticism, setbacks, and the inevitable periods where nothing seems to work. And often, it requires a degree of obsession that most healthy, well-balanced people wouldn't choose even if they could. Many highly intelligent people have the engine but lack one or more of these other crucial elements. They have the cognitive capability to do exceptional work, but they also value work-life balance, or they want diverse interests rather than singular focus, or they haven't found the particular problem that ignites their passion, or they simply weren't in the right place at the right time to develop their gifts fully. This doesn't represent wasted potential. It represents human beings making choices, conscious or unconscious, about how to live their lives. A person with an IQ of 150 who becomes a high school teacher isn't wasting their intelligence. They're using it to make complex material accessible to young minds, to inspire curiosity, to change individual lives in ways that may matter more than publishing another academic paper that 3 specialists will read. A profoundly gifted person who chooses to have children and focus on parenting isn't squandering their gifts. They're applying exceptional intelligence to the most human of endeavors, raising the next generation with thoughtfulness, creativity, and deep engagement. The concept of wasted potential assumes there's a single correct way to use intelligence, that the only meaningful application is producing recognized achievements in traditionally valued fields. But this assumption is narrow and ultimately dehumanizing. It reduces people to their cognitive capabilities and dismisses all the other dimensions of human life that give it meaning and value. One of the most important distinctions we can make, one that becomes clearer as we look across the full spectrum of intelligence, is the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is cognitive processing power, the speed and efficiency with which your brain handles information, recognizes patterns, solves problems, and manipulates abstract concepts. It's largely innate, relatively stable across your lifetime, and measurable through standardized testing. Wisdom is something entirely different. Wisdom is the capacity to see situations in their full context, to recognize the limitations of your own knowledge, to make decisions that account for long-term consequences and multiple stakeholders' needs, to understand human nature with compassion and nuance, to know when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen. You can have high intelligence without wisdom. You can be brilliant at solving logical problems while making terrible decisions in your personal life. You can understand complex systems while completely missing simple human truths. You can see intricate patterns in data while remaining blind to your own biases and limitations. And conversely, you can have modest intelligence but profound wisdom. You can think slowly and carefully while making consistently good decisions. You can lack formal education while possessing deep understanding of human nature. You can struggle with abstract reasoning while navigating relationships with exceptional skill and emotional intelligence. Wisdom develops through experience, reflection, humility, and willingness to learn from mistakes. It requires emotional maturity, the ability to regulate your reactions and consider perspectives beyond your own immediate feelings. It requires moral development, a sense of ethics and values that guides your choices. And it requires what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to recognize the limits of your knowledge and the biases that shape your perceptions. Some of the wisest people I've encountered have been individuals with average or even below average intelligence who have lived thoughtfully, paid attention to their experiences, learned from their mistakes, and developed genuine insight into how to live well and treat others with dignity. And some of the least wise people I've known have been highly intelligent individuals who have never questioned their assumptions, never examined their biases, and never developed the emotional capacity to see beyond their own perspective. This distinction matters enormously because our culture often conflates intelligence with wisdom, assuming that smart people will naturally make good decisions and that their opinions on any topic deserve special weight. But intelligence without wisdom can be dangerous. It gives someone the cognitive tools to rationalize poor choices, to construct elaborate justifications for harmful behavior, and to persuade others of ideas that sound brilliant but are fundamentally flawed. There's something deeply unfair about the distribution of intelligence. Some people are born with exceptional cognitive gifts through no effort or merit of their own. Others are born with significant cognitive limitations through no fault or failure of their own. And most of us land somewhere in the middle, with capabilities that feel neither exceptional nor limiting, but simply average. This randomness can feel difficult to accept. Why should one person get the cognitive tools to become a brilliant scientist while another struggles to read? Why should intelligence, which shapes so much of life outcome, educational opportunity, professional success, earning potential be distributed so unevenly? There's no satisfying answer to this question because the question itself rests on the assumption that the universe should be fair, that human beings should start from equal positions with equal capabilities. But fairness, in this cosmic sense, simply doesn't exist. We are born into different circumstances, with different bodies, different brains, different genetic inheritances, and different opportunities. What we can control, what matters morally and practically, is how we respond to this fundamental inequality. Do we create systems that help people at every intelligence level develop their capabilities and live with dignity? Do we structure education to support both those who need extra help and those who need extra challenge? Do we build workplaces that find meaningful roles for people with different cognitive profiles? Do we distribute resources in ways that prevent intelligence from becoming the sole determinant of life quality? These aren't questions about changing biology. They're questions about creating social structures that acknowledge biological diversity and respond to it with compassion and practical wisdom. And on an individual level, how we think about our own intelligence, whether we experience it as above average, average, or below average, shapes how we move through the world. Do we fall into the trap of believing that intelligence determines human worth? Do we feel superior to those less intelligent or inferior to those more intelligent? Or do we recognize intelligence as one human characteristic among many, important in certain contexts, irrelevant in others, never a measure of fundamental human value? Where do you stand? Throughout this exploration, you've perhaps been thinking about where you fall on this spectrum. Maybe you've recognized yourself clearly in one of the descriptions. Maybe you've felt uncertain, seeing aspects of yourself in multiple ranges. Maybe you've felt defensive, wanting to believe you're higher than the numbers suggest. Or maybe you've felt relief at understanding why certain things have always felt difficult. Here's what I invite you to consider. Your intelligence level, whatever it is, represents the cognitive tools you have to work with. It shapes certain aspects of your experience, how quickly you learn, how easily you grasp abstractions, how naturally certain types of problem-solving come to you. But it doesn't determine who you are or what your life can become. If you're in the lower ranges of intelligence, your challenges are real and deserve acknowledgement. Tasks that others handle easily may always require extra effort for you. Educational and professional opportunities may be more limited. The world may not always accommodate your needs or recognize your gifts, but you're capable of meaningful work, genuine relationships, moments of joy and pride, and a life filled with dignity and purpose. Your worth is not diminished by your cognitive limitations. If you're in the average ranges, you're in good company, literally half of humanity. You have the cognitive tools to navigate modern life successfully, to learn what you need to learn, to solve the problems you'll encounter, and to build a satisfying life. The fact that you're not exceptional doesn't make you inadequate. It makes you human, part of the vast middle ground where most of human experience unfolds. If you're in the superior or very superior ranges, you have gifts that open doors and create opportunities. Use them well, but don't let them define your entire identity. Develop the other capacities that make life rich: emotional intelligence, compassion, humility, the ability to connect with people whose minds work differently from yours. Your intelligence is a tool, not a measure of your worth, and the most important question isn't how smart you are, but what you do with whatever level of intelligence you have. And if you're in the exceptional or profoundly gifted ranges, you carry both extraordinary capability and unique burdens. The world needs what you can contribute, the insights you can generate, the problems you can solve, the boundaries you can push. But the world also needs you to remain human, to cultivate connection alongside achievement, to develop wisdom alongside intelligence, and to remember that your exceptional mind is part of who you are, not the entirety of who you are. We've spent thousands of words now exploring intelligence in its many forms, examining how it shows up at different levels, what it enables, what it limits, how it shapes lives across the full spectrum of human experience. But here's the deeper truth that settles in when you really sit with all of this. Intelligence is fascinating to study and important to understand. It shapes real outcomes in real lives. It deserves our attention and our thoughtful consideration. But it's also, in the end, just one way that human beings differ from each other. We also differ in creativity, in emotional sensitivity, in physical capability, in resilience, in kindness, in courage, in humor, in the capacity to love and be loved. We differ in our values, our interests, our experiences, and the particular combination of strengths and limitations that makes each person unique. A truly wise perspective holds intelligence lightly, acknowledging its importance without making it ultimate, recognizing its impact without letting it determine worth. The person with an IQ of 85 who lives with integrity, treats others with kindness, and finds meaning in their relationships is living just as valuable a life as the person with an IQ of 150 who makes groundbreaking discoveries. Their different lives, certainly, shaped by different capabilities and different challenges, but value and worth don't scale with IQ points. What matters most isn't where you fall on the bell curve. It's what you do with whatever capabilities you have, how you treat the people around you, whether you live with authenticity and integrity, and whether you find meaning and purpose in the particular life you've been given. Intelligence can be a gift or a burden, an opportunity or a barrier, depending not just on its level, but on how you relate to it, understand it, and integrate it into your full humanity. And perhaps that's the final invitation of this exploration, to see intelligence clearly without the distortions of ego or insecurity or social comparison, to understand your own cognitive capabilities honestly and compassionately, to recognize both what you can do and what you can't, both where you excel and where you struggle, and then to build a life that honors your actual capabilities while developing all the other dimensions of human experience that make life worth living. We've traveled together through every level of intelligence that human beings experience, from those who need the most support to those whose minds operate at the furthest edges of human capability. We've met people at each level, seen their challenges and their gifts, and recognized that every point on this spectrum includes fully human lives, deserving of dignity, capable of meaning, and valuable beyond measure. If this exploration has given you insight into your own mind, helped you understand yourself or others with more compassion, or simply satisfied your curiosity about this fascinating dimension of human diversity, then it has served its purpose. Intelligence is real, it varies widely, it shapes lives in meaningful ways, but it never, ever determines human worth. Wherever you fall on this spectrum, I hope you'll honor your particular gifts, accept your particular limitations, and build a life that feels authentic to who you actually are, not who you think you should be based on some number or label. Thank you for walking this journey with me, for staying curious, for thinking deeply, and for holding all of this with the gentleness and wisdom it deserves.